this, and I came here to make copies, and I panicked because we're all out of time making machine over here. So I texted Chris, and he said, no, we're going to pick it up tomorrow, we're all out. What can I do? How many notes? I thought, well, I made it on the printer. Peggy helped me out, and she printed off a bunch of these, so it's not real clear. That's because it's off my printer. But, and I hope you have one you might share with somebody because we only have a limited number. I kind of get a few more back there. You didn't get a second page. Some of those holes where you print one time and you print like that. You need one that's very small back there for you. Just a reminder where we are. We've been talking the last 4 weeks on the history of what Islam, Mohammedanism, whatever you want to call it, was in history. Those historical things are not something we as Christians came up with. Those are actually historical records that the Muslims came up with about 100 years after Muhammad's death. So they're fairly accurate as far as, and some of the things are, kind of legends, perhaps it built up, and they may or may not be true, but battles and so forth, probably most of them are true. And a lot of the material I got, and I told you I came from a few books, some real good ones. What Every American Needs to Know About the Quran. That's got a lot of good general information. And then a little more in-depth and deep one is called Answering Islam by Norman Geisler. It's very good, but just very theological and a lot of material. And what we're covering mostly tonight is called The Cross and Crescent by Erwin Lutzer. He's just a strong Christian author. And what we're looking at in Islam, of course, we're looking at it from a Christian perspective. You wouldn't hear this from a Muslim speaker. You hear about all the good things that Muslims and what a peaceful religion is. But anyway, we're trying to be as objective and honest and in a way, warning, you might say, of what really is behind this so-called religion. We're looking tonight at the modern, or really up-to-date, some of the events more recently in Islam. And one of those is Constantinople. Last time we met, we talked about the Battle of 670, I forget what year it was, but anyway, and how the Christian or the Byzantine people and armies protected that city, and it was saved at that time. There were several more attempts by Muslims to conquer Constantinople because the location of that city was in such a place that it affected all of Europe and had big influence because of the church, the folks who you might say led the church at that time, and the influence of the church was right there in Constantinople. In 1453, the Ottoman Turks conquered that city. They finally got enough armies together and surrounded it, and big battle there. You see the idea of the artist's rendition of what happened. And they overwhelmed the city. They attacked it, breached the walls, and Byzantine emperor who was inside told his people, prepare to die, because they knew those armies, and there were just multiple thousands of armies getting ready to come in. And he did that. He announced that, and then he went out to battle and never saw him again after he got killed. And most of the people in that city of Constantinople were killed. Thousands of people in there, as these armies were attacking, they all crowded into the church, this church of the Holy Wisdom, Hagia Sophia. The notices there written about them. Thousands of people crammed in. It's a huge, huge church building, a huge dome over the top of it. They all prayed for deliverance. They were assuming maybe some Florentine or another Venetian, I guess a Venetian army would come and help them, and they never showed up. And this Ottoman Turk army rushed in, soldiers all over the city. They killed families in their homes, went home to home, pulled families out, killed them, destroyed, cut their heads off, everything. Churches were ransacked, a lot of churches around the city. Nuns were raped. Like one historian said, killing, raping, looting, and burning, and enslaving went on according to tradition, the tradition of the Muslim armies to do those things. He said the troops had to be satisfied. That was the feeling. And the Sultan of Turkey, or of the Ottoman Empire at that time, the Sultan entered in. He commanded the church, this magnificent structure, to be turned into a mosque. It became, after that, a mosque. Crosses were removed. In fact, we've got a picture. This isn't the same one. This is one in well, Constantinople, it was changed, the name of course was changed to Istanbul after that, and never been Constantinople since. But this is one of the churches in there. You see what was turned into is that dome-like structure, and those minarets, those four column things with pointy tops, were traditional for a mosque. All the crosses were removed, Bibles, books, everything was burned. The mosaic artistry of the walls were covered over, plastered over. Quotes from the Quran were written. So anything Christian, anything related to Christ and Christianity, crosses were taken out. Today, not this structure, but this Hagia Sophia, this Church of the Holy Wisdom, which is a huge, huge structure, like a Colosseum almost, has been turned into a museum. You can go there today and see everything that's no longer a church. Anyway, you get the idea there. And the feeling was, and even today, folks will say, when we live in that city, that Muslims, the triumph of Islam over Christianity showed us that Muslims or Islam was superior over Christianity. Their attitude is it's a superior religion because of what happened here and other places. So for centuries, 1,400 years, this kind of stuff was going on. So we really don't have to go over those history years, including this, because constantly there were battles and fighting, and Muslims were constantly trying to take territory, take churches, take areas, and tell people either convert or die. Or in some cases, we'll find out in a minute, become slaves. Except for 2 centuries, called the Crusades. Around 1090 or somewhere in there, the first crusade up until 200 years later, Christians fought back. And a few times they fought back. Every other time it was constant battling of Muslims against Christians and knocking out Christian churches and countries to make them Muslim. And of course the message is, oh, these poor Muslims, they were invaded by the Christians. That's not the story at all. It's really simply trying to win back the territory, especially the Holy Land, back to the Lord. Now Stan wanted to say a word or two about that crusade time. You want to talk about that?
I just wanted to reinforce what Phil said, because he talked about the fact that we weren't going to do the Crusades as part of our study, and I can understand why. Because they're so complex in their idiosyncrasies of how they had to put things together in their allegiances and their alliances. But when President Obama used the typical historical look at the Crusades and demeaned Christianity by telling us how the darkest parts of human history are ruled over by the Crusades of what took place, I couldn't take that anymore. I shared in my Sunday school this little bit of information to talk about just what he talked about in 1475, which is sometime after the Crusades. What was going on in the Battle of Tours took place in France, and then we had the Byzantine blockage set up. So Islam is, when it's soft targets available, they are wonderfully successful. And the soft targets of the day were so-called Christian churches. A lot of them weren't really Christian. They were syncretist churches that had claimed to be Christian just because of the movement that was on, but they were arguing about Gnosticism and different types of theologies that had infiltrated the church and the early church with poor teaching. Remember, Bibles weren't very, very available, so they had to depend on teachers to bring the truth. And if there's Islam around and putting up a big fight, it would be difficult for teachers to come forth. Finally, Pope Urban II had put up with enough of what was going on with Islam. And said, we've got to do something about this. And he called together messengers from all over Europe, all over the Western civilization, to Clermont in France. And that just happens to be in the same territory as the Tours, where they actually stopped Islam. And the whole idea was, we've got to do something, we've got to get together and to fight off this thing. We've got to stop fighting among ourselves, which, if you understand medieval history with kings and the way they get replaced and get killed by their sons, and there's all this intrigue going on, it had to stop for the benefit of Christianity. So he called all these messengers together to form allegiances so they could go into what they call the Crusades. The word crusade means to the cross. I would compare it to what's going on today with Islam, the way Islam is flaring up all over through the Middle East. We need to get together with alliances to stop it. It would be no different today than it was back in those days when they didn't have the communication systems like we have. It might be what we saw George H. Bush do when Iraq invaded its neighborhood and had to go in there and take care of business because they did it. And how history treats that. If you want to go by the New York Times or the secular historian, it's all Christianity's fault. The carnal mind is hostile to God. I think that was part of our sermon this morning. And that's what we see happening in our world today, as well as what was taking place in that world at that time. Anyway, they got together and they formed the First Crusade, and it was wonderfully successful. The Arabs didn't know what to do. They'd never had resistance before, and they were totally defeated and caught by surprise. So the First Crusade was successful. Problem is, it took another 8 crusades. We're talking about a period of history, like I said, about 1095 to 1270 to 1290 in that period. And there was a total of 8 crusades. The First Crusade was the most successful crusade. All the rest of them weren't successful. We weren't necessarily defeated, but we didn't have victory as was planned. The next crusade that was successful, or modestly successful, was the Third Crusade, which was led by, anybody heard of Richard the Lionhearted? And he led that crusade, and at the time, the leader of the Muslims was a guy named Saladin. Have you heard of Saladin? And those are the 2 historical figures. King Richard came up through the feudal system and wasn't expected to be king, but became king because of deaths of other people in line. And as soon as he became king, he sold everything he could to put together an army for the Crusades. He had it so weighing on his heart that he needed to rescue. Saladin had gone into the Holy City, the Latin city as it was called, from the way it was trying to be both Christian and Muslim, and pushed the cross off the thing and started building a mosque, just like what we saw take place in Constantinople. So Richard III did the Third Crusade against Saladin, and that was in the 1170 area of history. But he wasn't successful in doing what he did, but he did set up a compromise with Saladin in which they would share the city of Jerusalem. So the Christians would be allowed to have their holy places, and Muslims would have, of course, the temple now in the place where the purpose was. That's what I have. President, maybe you ought to get your facts straight.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Anyway, that shows that Christians did push back, you might say. Of course, all the rewritten history is that Christians invaded somehow, and that's not the case. They were simply trying to restore things back to, you might say, Christian or Holy Land area, which is Jewish today, and Jerusalem and so forth. Anyway, but you'll think about the history of Islam. When we look at this, the history of Islam, for 1,400 years, it consisted of brutality, violence, political and military system. Because when they won a territory, it wasn't just let's have a little religious service. That meant you were under their political system that it disguised itself in its true intent under a religious facade. Where did religion come in? That's always been their past history. That's what they're doing today, if you think about it. A religious facade disguised as if it's just another religion. Well, all religions are the same, everybody would say. But underneath that is a political, military system. And everywhere we go, you'd see extermination of all vestiges of Christianity, for the most part, especially churches. As I said, tearing down crosses, taking away anything that would have the appearance of Christianity, any books, any Bibles, anything related to Christianity was not permitted in any of these United States. And you see this all across North Africa. We talked about that as we looked at that map and swinging across Egypt, Syria, Iraq, Iran, even today. All these areas totally controlled. by Islam, either state or extremists and so forth. And of course, that extremist group is moving further and further. And mentioning mosques, and this picture, of course, of the mosque, you notice the difference of that in the church. Looks like a church, but those minarets, those things on the side, indicate that that belongs to the Islamic people, Muslim. The mosque in today is a center of Islamic authority. This is where the muftis, I should say, or imams, whichever you want to call them different things in different countries, they make, in those places, they make political declarations, they expound upon Islamic law, which is Sharia law. In other words, they take the Quran and say, this is the way it is, folks, and they declare what is correct. They urge the faithful to fight in what's called, to fight against infidels. And I guess who that is? That's us. And so in all these places where a mosque is, that's generally what a leader is going to do. Now, they'll say, oh no, they're just preaching peace. They're just having a nice little service preaching peace. But they're basically explaining these types of things. And Sharia law is promoted and disseminated in these mosques all around the world. The mosques today in the West Bank, Gaza, those are places where this type of turmoil is generated. London, Germany, even here in the U.S., where there are mosques, there's the promotion of this type of violence, take back of property, and so forth. In Western countries, now in the Far East or Middle East, these mosques are pretty much protected there. That is the system. They do everything their way. But in the Western world, our country, a mosque becomes kind of a beachhead in enemy territory. Because we're the enemy. We're the infidels. So each one is set up, they place these mosques and bring them into places like the U.S. and especially in Europe today. They realize they think of themselves in enemy territory. They're ultimately doing the same things, preaching these things. And what they have is called sacred space. There's a theology or a doctrine called sacred space. It's a teaching in Islam. Let me read you something about that. And the word, and I think I wrote it down before you, is called, I don't know how to pronounce it, waqf, or waqf, I'm not sure what that is, but it means a holy endowment from Allah. In other words, any time a territory is taken, that's why this region in Israel today will they'll never end the conflict, because their belief is once a territory belongs to Islam, it's never surrendered. It can never go to someone else. It belongs to Allah. And it's a perpetual claim to that land. And for all perpetuity, it has to be reclaimed. In other words, it was taken back. And like we talking about the Crusades, that land was conquered the first crusade. They won it back, but then they came and said, we got to win it back. And they were fighting back and forth constantly. Even today, there's a constant battle saying that's our land because we have a mosque there. And guess where the mosque is? Right where the temple used to be located in Jerusalem. In fact, all the lands of the world, according to Muhammad, was to be a mosque, or to be a Muslim land, given by Allah to the Muslims. That was his feeling. He says that in the Quran. In other words, Muslims are destined to dominate the whole world. Now, you look at moderate Muslims today, or those who are kind of peaceful type and don't stir anything up. A lot of them around in some of these countries. But their attitude towards that concept is, well, that land, the world is going to someday become Muslim land. The Islamists, the terrorists, the ones who are, really strong on this is our religion, their feeling is there's got to be one now. Let's get started winning it now. And you see that difference. The moderate Muslims, they say, well, it's going to be ours someday, but right now we're not going to push for it. But the terrorists, the fundamentalists are saying, let's go get it now. So this holy endowment from Allah means it is forever. And the duty of all Muslims is to go regain it. Either take it or regain it. And by any means, that means jihad, that means fighting for it as well. Muhammad felt like the whole world was a mosque. The word mosque means a place of prostration. If you remember Muhammad, way back when he ran the gods out of Mecca, and he had them all thrown out, and the city became his, he made a mosque out of that location. Remember that Kaaba, box-like structure is he made a mosque around it. It means a place of prostration where people would bow and pray. And to Muhammad, the earth is a mosque. Listen to a quote from a Islamic scholar of the day. He's around today. I don't know what his name is. His name is Abu Mahdidi, I guess it is. He says, Islam is not merely a religious creed or compound name for a few forms of worship, but a comprehensive system which envisages to annihilate all tyrannical and evil systems and to enforce its own program of reform which is best deemed for the well-being of mankind. So even today, these folks don't think of this as, oh, we're just going to save ourselves. No, their feeling is this whole world belongs to Muhammad, to Islam, and it's a system. It's not just a faith or a religion. It's a whole world system where politics, where military, where it all comes together in a system like that. Now, all across Europe today, moving up to today, in modern day, you see that Islam is beginning to take over. Charles Martel, Charles the Hammer, back in 732, you remember the Battle of Tours, he stopped the attack, the onslaught of Islam into Europe. There in what's now France, Battle of Tours, stopped it. Then the battle in Constantinople, excuse me. So Europe was spared. Isn't it interesting today that there's a different strategy? It's not battle, violent entry into Europe, but now it's a entry through immigration, folks moving there from other countries, coming in, and you see it all across Europe. Because what's happened is those churches like this one and others, are closing their doors. People aren't going to church anymore in Europe. Europe, churches are passé. All through Germany, all the European countries, their churches are basically closing down. What are they doing? They're selling their churches. This is buying these churches. Islam. Muslims. Now, when they do that, guess what they're thinking? New territory. This is our territory. They put up the minarets beside it, and it becomes the territory of Muslims. Slowly but surely, they continue moving in, immigrating, coming in, and basically crowding out Christian influence. That's the basic strategy today. And those mosques, and by the way, the main reason the Middle East conflict will never end is this concept of once territory, sacred territory belongs to Muslims, and they'll be reclaimed. Jerusalem was conquered in 637 by, not Muhammad, but his people afterwards, conquered. A mosque was built there, the Mosque of Omar I talked about, 692, right on the Temple Mount. It's Muslim territory. They will never surrender that. That's why they are so hatred, one of the hatreds of Israel, because Israel controls that territory. And they feel like it's theirs. They will fight to the death to say it's theirs. This doctrine of sacred space goes on with mosques taking over churches. When they come into Europe and other places, they turn into a church. Sacred space, same thing. Even homes. When Muslims move into homes, their feeling is that home is always going to be a Muslim home. That family. That's why there's so much encouragement for immigration today from Muslim countries. That's why I think Franklin Graham said we need to stop immigration from Muslim countries. We really do. There's a strategy involved with it. It's not just well, these people are nice folks and they need a place. No, they have a strategy to move in here and to basically crowd out any other view. Real estate agents who sell homes, they sell them to Muslim real estate agents, I should say, selling property looking for a Muslim family. Because when that Muslim family moves in, that becomes their territory, sacred space. The more you got, the more sacred spaces you've got covering this area. It becomes a territory for Muslims. You remember a couple of years ago when they were fighting to have a mosque put in New York City next to the World Trade Center? And all the people were, oh, we just want a place for our people. There was a strategy behind that. That was going to be sacred space. They wanted a place right next to where they had the best attack they ever had of this country. So they could say, Islam conquered. Look what we did. We conquered. Our space is right next to the place we brought down. There's a strategy behind it. Nobody talks about it. You don't hear it in the news. It's exactly what the concept was behind it. Of course, their desire now is to build somewhere else. And this idea that just, oh, we want freedom, people are free to do as they want, so they can build a mosque. Our country needs to stop the political correctness. We really need to stop that. We need to realize and come to our sense about what we are facing in this country, and especially among Christians. But all across Europe, this is the case. This religious tolerance, this political correctness, open doors to Muslims, churches becoming mosques, and then once that's the case, and all these folks are spread out and sort of crowding out the Christians, you know what they start doing? They insist that Europeans and others respect the rights of Muslims. It's their place, they're living here, so now respect our beliefs, respect what we believe. And because of cultural and religious sensitivity, folks will say, oh, you know, we don't want to offend them. Oh, we might offend them if we say something or do something. In other words, just continue to crowd out Christianity slowly but surely as they continue moving in. Now, the strategy in the Islamic countries is very simple. They do the same thing there, it's just more open. They will come into a place, a family in a house, and they'll declare that a mosque. And the teaching is when the mosque is in a place, that mosque cannot be any more, it cannot be closer than 100 meters, or no church can be within 100 meters. There were 2 churches in Egypt. They'd spent millions of dollars building those churches, 2 within a few blocks of each other. And so a family moved in between them, declared it to be a mosque, and the government shut down the churches because they were within 100 meters, 100 yards of the church. And they had to follow that rule. That is the Muslim law in that country. So it's basically infiltrate. It's just a religion, and behind that religion is this deception, this whole system that follows of Sharia law. And that's why we talk about Sharia law in this country, hear about it, in places that want to have it, states that are saying we're not going to allow this. Well, those states are smart to do that, because that is what is coming. Now think about it for Christians. In the past centuries, and even today in some countries, the conversion or death thought. Let me see if I've got this on this.
There's a pig farmer in Texas, and the property next to his farm was for sale a few months ago, and some Muslims bought it and wanted to put a mosque in there. And we were trying to get the pig farmer to close down his farm and get rid of the pigs because it was so offensive to them. I think he had the right idea. He went out and bought more pigs.
Yeah.
Right. He didn't build a mosque.
Right. Really, I think it's the fact that we as Americans are so ignorant of the whole Muslim thing. We don't know anything about it. We didn't know anything about it until 10 years or 15 years ago when they knocked down the Trade Center. But I think people really need to be aware of what this religion so-called is. It's not just a religion, it's far more than that. Conversion or death. That is the concept that Muslims have had for the last 1,400 years. It's not something new. But even today, if you are in a Muslim country, you convert to Islam, to Christianity, you will die. The word dhimma there means a pact of surrender. It's a covenant. It's a covenant of liability that when a Muslim nation comes in and takes over, they give those Christians the opportunity to become a dhimmi, which is the word described there. It means a servant. And it's a servant forever after, perpetuity. And it basically is a continuous public humiliation as a person. In other words, you're stating to be able to live, it's a permission to remain alive, basically. Let me find
That word is in Obamacare. That word is in the Obamacare law.
Okay. The idea is that if you're a Christian or not a Muslim, if you're not a Muslim, you become a dhimmi in the Muslim area. This is true in these countries today. And they allow you to have this dhimma, which is a covenant, liability. This is basically what it amounts to. These are some of the things. Each country has some little different variations, perhaps, of this. But I think it's in your notes there of what constitutes this statement. And basically, you sign it or you agree to it. Oppressive taxes called jizya and public humiliation. You know, we talk about today how we don't want to discriminate against races. We don't want to discriminate against religion. But when you do that, you say, we won't discriminate against Israel. Guess what? You're turning it over to them to discriminate. Because that's exactly what they do. The whole system is discrimination. It's a permission to remain alive, and it's a constant reminder of your status as a defeated person. And here's some of the things that's in it. read them off here. You can see them on your paper or up there. You cannot build new houses of worship. In other words, churches cannot be built in Muslim lands. You cannot repair damaged ones. In other words, if they blow up your church, you can't rebuild it. It's just not allowed. You must house and feed Muslim soldiers. Of course, this is in the past, but if a Muslim soldier needed help and come to your house as a Christian, you had to treat him with great respect. Feed him. Offer hospitality to Muslim travelers for 3 days. Put them in your house, whether you had money or not. No public display of religion, no crosses, etc. No proselytizing anyone to their religion. If you're a Christian and you try to win somebody to Christ, you cannot do that. You lose your life if you do that. Could not prevent any kin from converting to Islam. In other words, your family members and relatives. You can't take them out of Muslim belief, bring them to Christianity if you're a Christian. Could not bear arms or swords. Isn't that interesting? We can have arms, but you can't. The best way is to keep people in a state of surrender and submission. No printing or selling of books pertaining to religion, Christianity especially. Bibles, books, none of that. Could not build a home on higher ground than Muslim home next door to it. That's the idea that that Muslim person is better than you. You get down low, you're a second-class citizen. You must give up a seat to a Muslim who won. In other words, you're sitting in a chair, that Muslim came by and said he won your seat. You don't give it to him. This Dhimmi pact, or pact of surrender, basically places you in a position of a second-class citizen, or a citizen who is submitted. And basically you agree to this along with taxes, so you're alive and survive. Now as you read these requirements, think about it. Your family's there, and you're trying, as a Christian, to do the best you can to provide for them. And all these things are put upon you, and it's an embarrassment. You're constantly embarrassed in the community where you go to, because you can't wear the same types of clothes. I think I skipped that one. You couldn't wear a garment that resembles a Muslim. So everybody knows you're different. Everybody looks down upon you. Everybody spits upon you. Everybody treats you as dirt because you're a Christian. And the law, the country, the legal system allows that. Well, after a while, you say, your family, the next one come along after you, and the next generation, you say, look, it's just more easy. It's much easier just to become a Muslim than not to do all this stuff. That's why you see in countries today, there are no Christian communities that are growing and thriving. They're oppressed. They're treated like trash. Not to mention the women of those countries and places and how they're also second-class citizens. We'll get to that in just a second. But Muslim view of Christianity, what do they believe? What do they think of us as Christians? We are considered an abrogated religion, which means we've been surpassed. We've been superseded by Islam. Let me mention that. They had jizya. I think I skipped that. Jizya, I mean, the oppressive taxation. Let me just read you something about that. Page 68. In those countries, when they take the tax from you, they don't just do it, I don't know if we do it today, but the last few centuries, it was a humiliating thing. You as a head of a house would have to come to a location, you'd be seated there, and you'd be a dhimmi, which is that person who is a lower class citizen. You'd be placed on that seat with your tax payment or whatever, you have to pay it. And while you're there, someone, a Muslim leader, would take his hand and strike you on the neck harshly to show like as if he was cutting your head off, as if you were executing him. And all the community, the Muslims would watch. They'd come and watch this spectacle, this opportunity to take a tax from someone. It's a humiliating tax. Because it makes it look like, well, first of all, it injures you. You have to come, you have to then give them money, like we're really, subservient to you. And the Muslims would watch this spectacle. And the thing was, you had to come. You couldn't send a representative. You couldn't send a member of the family. It had to be you. You had to come. In other words, you must suffer this degradation personally. This kind of treatment, you guys accept it personally. So you can imagine, folks, after a while, it's just so much easier to become Islamic. Because after all, they love their loved ones. And another reason why people would convert. You realize that when you, as a country, and you were Christians, and people came, these armies came in, and they had your child up there in front of them and said, we've got a knife to his throat. You want to be a Muslim or not? You say, yeah, I guess I do. I want my child to live. You know, you're concerned about your family, and that's why these countries is such an oppressive system. Not a religion, but a real system that is, I think, satanic in a lot of ways. Okay, their view of Christianity mentioned abrogated religion, which means it's been superseded by Islam. Christianity has been superseded. They believe that Jesus was a prophet. He's spoken of in the Quran as a prophet. Muhammad believed he was a prophet, but he was not the best prophet. Muhammad was the best prophet. Muhammad was the final and greatest prophet. And that's what every Muslim today would tell you. Marital prohibition. Christians could not marry a Muslim woman. Christian man could not marry a Muslim woman. It's prohibited. Muslim men are encouraged to marry Christian women. You say, well, why would that be? Because, first of all, they could try to convert them to Muslim, but the children of that relationship would become Muslim. They would have to be Muslim. And all that husband has to do after those children are born is say, I divorce you. And she's out of the picture. Just say it. Doesn't have to go through any court. Just say it. I divorce you. And he can go marry a Muslim woman and take those children with him. That's why for women over here, that Muslim women who have become Christians, some of them, you may know a few. I've heard of a few in our near area have become Christians. They keep it a secret from their husband. Because their husband then has the right to take their children, that family, and go back to those countries and take those children with them and they'll never see them again. And that terrorizes those wives, those moms, who convert to Christianity. They have to keep it a real secret from their family. So you see, all these things that kind of encourage folks to either go with the Muslims, become an Islamic person, believe in that stuff, or somehow flee the country and get to a safer place. We saw those. There's no freedom of conscience. So, by the way, conversion to Islam. You need to realize it's very easy. I mentioned that this morning. It's very easy to convert to become a Muslim. All you have to do is say some words. All you have to do is confess a creed which says, no God but Allah, and Muhammad is Allah's messenger. All you have to do. You have to confess that. Now, the 5 pillars of Islam, I can't remember all of them now, but that's one of them, is that confession. Make that confession. If you believe that there's no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet or messenger. There's no repentance from sin. There's no change of heart. You just say, well, it's easy, isn't it? Oh, it's so easy. Once you're in, oh, it's so easy. Well, you try getting out. That's the hard part. You don't have a chance. There is no freedom of conscience in Muslim beliefs in Islam. You know, it's interesting how people, when Jesus was on this earth, in chapter 6 of John, the Bible says that he was telling them things that were hard to hear, and that many of his disciples left him. And they said to him, well, look at these things. And Jesus said, will you also go away? Jesus didn't say, you leave me and you die. But Muhammad did. Muhammad says, you leave, and you be an apostate. If you leave, you will be put to death. And that's the case in those countries today. And even in the Western world, even in the U.S., if you're a Muslim and you leave it, you may not be killed. You desire to kill. You get death threats. But if anything else, you'll be shunned. You'll be thrown out of your family. You'll be cast out. You'll have none of your family have nothing to do with you anymore. And those folks who leave, that's a big push to stay in, just for common sense, just for protection. Because this religion is a religion of fear, pure fear. You're threatened constantly if you do anything against their views and their ways. 2 reasons why Islam does not allow the freedom of conscience to choose what faith you want to go to. First of all, there's a strict prohibition against Muslims converting to Christianity because they believe it's apostate. It means they're falling away from the truth. They're falling away from what they believe is true. Now, they won't really follow through with their truth, but they'll say you're an apostate. Muslims who convert are always rejected by their families. They're ostracized. They're persecuted by the Muslim community. In those countries, they'll receive death, if not death threats. The second reason people Muslims will not allow for freedom of conscience, because if people were allowed to no longer observe conversion as apostasy, you know what happened? Thousands of Muslims would leave. They get out because this would interfere. The fear would be gone if they had freedom to do that. They would reject Islam in a moment. The women especially said, "We want to get out of this." But it's that fear that keeps Muslims bound to Islam and stops their search for truth. Now, they'd love to read the Bible. They'd love to hear the freedom that you have in Christ. They realize they don't have that and have a fear they stay with that. It is a religion of fear. Well, the other section here we talk about here is hate speech. That's what's going on today as well. For silencing speech. In Canada, there was a gentleman who, a pastor actually, who started speaking up against a local school situation where Muslims were given privilege of speaking and teaching. He said, "Wait a minute, that's a violent religion. Why are you doing that?" Canada has a hate speech law. If you speak against someone in a hateful way, whether it's gays or anything else, you'll be called to account. You'll have to either be fined or go in jail or whatever. He was silenced. He was calling it a violent religion. And so nothing negative in that country can be said about Islam or Muhammad because it's hate speech. And notice the extreme offenses you'll find in this world. When you say something or something happened, you remember a guy down in Florida burned the Quran a few years ago. Burned their holy book. And what a firestorm in the Muslim world. They just, had all kinds of riots, killing people, parading in the streets. They were so mad. It's so foolish about something like that. Or the cartoons, you remember that French newspaper, and it happened there when they made fun in cartoons of Muhammad. In a politically manufactured offense, it's just pure manufactured riots that went on about this thing. What they're doing by that is showing that you'll offend us. You'll offend us terribly if you do that. Now, Muhammad never considered God. He never claimed to be deity. He claimed to be a prophet. But his Quran, Islamic people believe was a holy book. This is the only miracle they believe is his writing of the Quran. So that's very holy to them. You don't make fun of that, I suppose. But even today, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, the OIC, is constantly trying to put this word, Islamophobia, out in front of us. Why? You're just spouting Islamophobia, fear of the peace-loving Muslims. And there's this picture, this image that Muslims are peaceable, they're good people. Don't say anything about them. Be silent about them. And pushing in the United Nations, this group, for blasphemy laws to be passed in the West, countries like Canada and the U.S. I mean, it's foolish because they're basically stopping free speech. And they're stopping, in their words, the defamation of Islam. Their feeling is, well, you're offending Islamic people, so be silent. You see the procedure, the strategy, very simple. Notice the silent Western invasion, what we're having today, is not by armies coming here, it's by people immigrating and then toleration. Tolerate our religion. It's a religion. Everybody's religion is the same, right? And then silencing of speech, establishment of Muslim communities, mosques, using political correctness to allow Muslim intolerance. Allow the Muslims to be like they are so they can be intolerant of everybody else. You see, the intolerance thing only goes one way. We have to be tolerant, but they don't. That's the strategy. That's what we see in the silent Western invasion of what's going on here today. And that's it. We'll next week try to talk about current day ISIS, what it is, and our Christian response, and then maybe Americans and Western response that we need to have too. I'll try to finish up next week. If not, we may go. Okay? I don't want to keep going to board with this. Any questions or comments?